If it's Tuesday, President Trump has a new message for Hamas. If they don't disarm, we will disarm them. As the White House navigates the next phase of a fragile peace deal, and Israel pushes for the release of all the deceased hostages. Plus, the government shutdown hits the 2-week mark, becoming one of the longest shutdowns in U.S. history, with lawmakers still no closer to reaching a deal, and the White House threatening more layoffs and more cuts to programs backed by Democrats. And Democratic Governor Janet Mills of Maine enters a hotly contested Senate primary in a state that's a top target for Democrats in the midterms, as the 77-year-old candidate reignites a debate in her party over age and generational change. Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington. As the Trump administration riding high from the president's victory lap in the Middle East after securing an end to the hostilities between Israel and Hamas, and all living hostages finally freed. The question is, what now for the president's peace plan abroad and his agenda here at home? There are major challenges facing the next phase of the peace agreement. Congress remains at a standstill on day 14 of the government shutdown, and the Trump administration is facing renewed scrutiny over an intensifying crackdown on its critics. Now, at any moment, we expect to hear from the president when he posthumously awards the Medal of Freedom to conservative activist Charlie Kirk, whose tragic assassination has reverberated through the conservative movement and sparked a White House campaign to root out what it calls the radical left. We are monitoring this event and will bring you any news as it develops. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, the fragile ceasefire appears to be largely holding. That according to Israeli military that says the Red Cross is on its way to a meeting point in northern Gaza to receive the remains of more of the deceased hostages. But despite the initial success of phase 1 of the peace deal, serious questions remain about how to implement phase 2, which includes the disarmament of Hamas and the creation of a transitional government. Earlier today, while hosting a lunch with the president of Argentina, President Trump had this warning for Hamas.
We had a great week. We had a great weekend. We had a great period of time in the Middle East. It was very comprehensive. It went very rapidly, and I think it's going to lead to something that's going to be unrecognizable, certainly for the Middle East. What's taken place in the last few days, people can't believe it. I've never seen anything like it.
How long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games. If they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
And at home, there's still no end in sight to the government shutdown, with Democrats and Republicans only digging in even more. And layoffs of federal workers now underway and facing legal challenges. Yesterday, Speaker Johnson warned this could turn into the longest shutdown ever, while today he showed no signs that he's willing to budge.
It's 2 weeks of Democrats in Congress inflicting untold pain on the American people for nothing other than pure politics. I'm doing the right thing, the clearly obvious thing, the traditional thing. That's exactly what Chuck Schumer voted for in March of this year and gave impassioned speeches was the right and only thing. I don't have anything to negotiate. We're not playing games. They're playing a game. We're not. The strategy is to do the right and obvious thing and keep the government moving for the people.
Senators are returning to Capitol Hill today, and later this evening they are expected to vote to try and advance the House-passed continuing resolution for the 8th time, and like all the previous attempts, it will likely fail. Joining me now is our team of reporters, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Elba, NBC News correspondent Daniel Hamagian in Jerusalem, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. Monica, tell us what the mood is like at the White House today after the victory lap the president took in the Mideast yesterday. Does the president plan on remaining engaged in the region to ensure his peace plan is fully implemented?
He does, Ryan. We know that from these comments that he made just a short time ago, and also indications from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's own son-in-law, Jared Kushner. They were both asked yesterday during that event in Egypt what their role was going to be moving forward, and they both said that they intended to be a part of whatever comes next when it comes to implementation of the next phases, which we know are going to be incredibly complex in terms of those big questions that you laid out in the introduction. Now, the president, for his part, says he will continue to be speaking with many important leaders in the region. He will still, of course, be in touch with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And he is saying that there are going to be consequences if Hamas does not follow through with their end of the agreement. But he didn't want to give any kind of a specific timeline of just how many weeks or months he's willing to give Hamas until he makes a decision and acts on what those consequences will be. He said it would be a reasonable amount of time that he's waiting to give them to first see if the additional remains of those bodies of the hostages that were promised to be handed over can actually be located and transferred and returned to their loved ones waiting in Israel so that they can have a proper Jewish burial. And we know that there's only a fraction so far in which that has been the case, and the president has been urging Hamas to try to do everything possible to get the rest of those remains so that they can be transferred. But then there is really a difficult part that is after that when it comes to just those basic questions of who will govern, who will handle security, and how will Hamas eventually disarm. Ryan.
Danielle, let's go to you now. Tell us about what the latest on the ground in the region is, particularly when it comes to the return of the remains of the deceased hostages.
Yeah, just in the last few moments, the IDF has confirmed that 4 more coffins of deceased hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross is now on its way to Israeli forces in Gaza, in an area that the IDF, of course, is still controlling. So that brings now the number of deceased hostages to return to 8 out of the 28. And those hostages, by the way, there will be a short ceremony by IDF troops on the ground out of respect, and then they'll be transferred onto a forensic facility in Israel for formal identification. There was a lot of anger yesterday when only 4 of the bodies were returned. The family members, and indeed I think the Israeli public as a whole, were expecting a lot more, though there had been concerns and expectations that not all 28 would be returned in one go. It was simply too difficult. First of all, the level of destruction is just astonishing. And number 2 is that many of the Hamas operatives who know or knew where the bodies were buried have since been killed themselves. And so, which is why we had the discussions of this international task force comprised of the U.S., Israel, Qatar, other countries to help the Red Cross, assist them in staffing, funding, intelligence to help them locate those bodies. But the Red Cross today coming out and saying this is going to be a massive challenge. It can take days, it can take weeks, potentially. You know, it is possible that some of these bodies will never be found.
That is just heartbreaking for the families. Danielle, tell us more about the detainees released by Israel and who have now returned to Gaza.
Yeah, the 1,700 detainees who came back to Gaza yesterday, and it's important for viewers to know, these are first mostly men who had nothing to do with the October 7th attacks, who have never been charged, who have never been tried, and it is under a controversial policy here in Israel that allows Israeli officials to hold people indefinitely without being charged. A lot of them came off of those buses looking quite gaunt, visibly malnourished, and in one case we saw, I think we have the video of this. We have one cameraman, a journalist, because among the detainees were doctors, nurses, journalists. One of them, Shadi Abu Siddo, 35 years old. You see him now, reunited with his wife. He had been told his wife and children had been killed. And he's about now, just in a few seconds, to realize that his children are there too. It is very moving. We spoke to him earlier today by phone, and he told us that he had been tortured, he said, in every way possible. There it is. He's seeing his kids for the first time. And he said he had been tortured, naked, deprived of food, deprived of sleep. And he came back to Gaza in disbelief of the level of destruction. He'd been detained for 20 months, and he said the Gaza Strip looked like Judgment Day.
And let's talk about President Trump today posting on social media that phase 2 of the deal begins now. Talk to us about the reality of the situation on the ground. How quickly could things start to get moving?
Yeah, I mean, I think for people on the ground, you know, what Donald Trump says and what they see with their own eyes are two very different things. I think the immediate fear for a lot of people is, the aid not coming in. First of all, the IDF and Israel have decided to restrict the amount of aid going into Gaza because not all of the deceased hostages have returned. And so now it is only 300 trucks, half of the amount that was expected, allowed in on a daily basis. And we've seen reports of Hamas deploying fighters, reasserting its control in the Gaza Strip. There are rival gangs involved here, and there's a video that circulated quite widely yesterday showing an execution by Hamas of 7 men on the ground with their hands tied behind their backs. I spoke to someone there, and I asked this person in Gaza, what was the level of fear now? And he says the fear is now a civil war. People are scared of stepping out. They're scared of being abducted. They're scared of being called traitors, of being collaborators with Israel. You know, yes, the ceasefire is in place. There are no bombs, no airstrikes right now. The skies are quiet. But on the ground, there are fears, as I say, that this could turn very ugly very quickly.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much. Obviously, a lot more to happen in that region. Let's turn back now to Washington. And Julie, let's talk about the reaction on Capitol Hill to the president brokering this deal. He's getting quite a bit of support, both from Republicans and Democrats.
He absolutely is, Ryan. Even Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, on the floor giving praise for the administration's actions. And if not directly praising what the president and his team has accomplished here, they are certainly thrilled and happy that these hostages are home, that there is a ceasefire in place in Gaza, that so many Palestinians were able to return to their homes, although the situation is still so fraught, as Danielle had laid out there. But even further than that, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, taking it up a notch this morning, telling reporters that he and the Israeli Knesset Speaker Ohana, have convened a call, have decided that next year, along with other leaders from around the globe, they will nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And so this is definitely something that the president had wanted to happen this year. Certainly Republicans wanting to award him for what he and his team accomplished here in the Middle East. But as Danielle laid out and as Monica had laid out, there are still so many questions to be answered of what happens next in the region. Ryan?
Okay, let's turn to domestic politics now, Julie. And obviously the shutdown continues, day 14. Does it seem like either side is budging?
No, the short answer is absolutely not. They are going to vote in the next hour and a half on it for an 8th time to try and reopen the government. The 3 Democrats that we've been seeing all this time join Republicans are expected to remain in the yes column, but we are not expecting to see any further Democrats join them. And that is because Democrats are still holding strong to their belief, their position, that Republicans need to compromise and negotiate now on restoring some of those health care cuts that happened over the summer, most notably, of course, the Affordable Care Act, the subsidies that are expiring at the end of this year, which Democrats point out will cause premiums to spike for millions of Americans. Republicans holding firm to their positions. The speaker just this morning again saying they are not going to negotiate over the government that they are saying Democrats are holding hostage. And so both sides completely dug in here, Ryan.
And as we're about to enter week 3, I mean, what's at stake? How soon could Americans start to feel the impacts of this? And specifically, what impacts could start to really set in this week?
They're already feeling the impacts. Of course, we've seen museum closures, Smithsonian closures, tourists here, not on the Capitol as we're used to seeing them. So that's already been happening. But people are now missing paychecks. On Friday, federal workers missed their first paychecks. I was talking to members of Capitol Police up here who are still coming to work to protect elected officials at a very critical time, at a fraught time when threats continue to be at a sky-high level. Political violence is at an all-time high as well. Those law the members of law enforcement are still showing up here to do their jobs, but already have missed paychecks. One of them telling me they don't know if they'll have money to put gas in their car. These are people who live paycheck to paycheck. Other agencies, people getting laid off by the administration. At least 4,000 people have been fired across various agencies. That number is expected to tick up, according to administration officials that I spoke to. And then practical impacts at airports, with TSA workers potentially calling out sick. The longer that this goes on, people working without pay, it is, of course, difficult to make that happen logistically, with childcare, with medical bills, and so forth. And so that is something that Americans are going to continue seeing and feeling the pain of. The administration, though, and Republicans continuing to blame the effects of the shutdown on Democrats, and no end in sight here as we enter vote 8 in a couple of minutes from now. And certainly the consequences are just going to continue building, Ryan.
Okay, not a lot of good news there, Julie, but thank you for delivering it anyway. I appreciate it. Coming up, how does it all end? We'll speak with a House Republican who's pushing back on Speaker Johnson's shutdown strategy. Congressman Kevin Kiley will join me in studio next. Plus, as we mentioned, we're keeping a close eye on the White House, where President Trump is expected to posthumously award Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom on what would have been Kirk's 32nd birthday. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, the shutdown has officially hit 2 weeks, with neither side appearing willing to budge. And on Capitol Hill, it's looking a lot like Groundhog Day, with the Senate set to vote again on a bill that's failed 7 times. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives remains out of session. Joining me now is one of those House members, California Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. We were talking about this a little before we went on the air. You're not in session right now, despite the fact that the government is shut down. And you voiced your own frustration about that. You think that the House should be back in session. Have you expressed that frustration to the Speaker, and what was his response?
I have. I mean, the Speaker has suggested that because the House voted for a 7-week short-term continuing resolution, that apparently there's no other reason for us to be in session. But the problem is we were supposed to be in session this week and the week before and the week before, irrespective of the government shutdown. Like, the House has a lot of things to do, including, by the way, passing our actual appropriation bills that are going to come due in a few weeks, even if the 7-week continuing resolution becomes law. But in addition to that, the very fact that we have a government shutdown is all the more reason to be here, so that we can do everything we possibly can to end this terrible thing for the American people.
And has he given you an explanation beyond just the strategy of it all? I mean, Democrats are saying it's just to delay the discharge petition on the Epstein files. Do you think that's playing any role in it? What's your sense of the rationale here?
Yeah, I can't speculate as to motivations, but I haven't heard any explanation that makes sense to me. And, I find it very frustrating. I am here to represent my constituents and to fight for my district and my state at the Capitol. And I can't do that when the House is out of session indefinitely and every oversight hearing is canceled. Every markup of legislation is canceled. All other activities of the House that were supposed to be happening, government shutdown or not, are not happening now.
Right. All right. And you and your colleagues are still getting paid as a result, even though the shutdown.
Well, I'm having my paycheck.
I know you're having your paycheck, but I do think it's worth making that point. One of your concerns during the shutdown is, of course, the military missing paychecks. That could potentially happen as soon as Wednesday. But President Trump says those service members will be paid from research and development funds. Do you think that's a smart move by the president? Do you support that? And do you think it's enough, given everything that's happening right now?
I do support it, absolutely. This is one of the reasons why I said also we need to come back, is to pass, at least if we couldn't solve the larger problem, to pay our troops bill, to make sure that our troops get paid. Because if our troops have to miss a paycheck, that's a horrible thing. I'm glad the White House was able to get creative in order to solve that problem, at least in the short term. But we're still talking about a lot of people going without paychecks, folks like air traffic controllers, TSA agents. I know the White House is working to try to find a solution for federal law enforcement. You have 1 million+ people being furloughed. You have federal contractors and the folks that they work with being furloughed. You have national parks, monuments, museums being closed down, other services that people are losing access to. A shutdown is a bad thing for the country. That's why I voted to avoid a shutdown during both this administration and the Biden administration. I wish that the Senate would go ahead and pass that bill that we passed, even though that's not an ideal solution, at least it would end the shutdown. I actually think that Senator Schumer is acting unreasonably in not doing so. But this is politics. Sometimes you have to work with people you believe are acting unreasonably.
So if we're to extrapolate that out, do you think the Speaker should be in a room with the Senate Majority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader and Hakeem Jeffries to try and find a way out of this impasse? And should health care negotiations be on the table right now?
Yes, we should be exploring any and all possible avenues to get the government back open. So Senator Schumer has raised the issue of the ACA subsidies. And I know that there are a number of people in both my party and the other party who are very concerned with the prospect of a sudden increase in healthcare premiums, particularly in California, where the cost of living is so high already. So there's going to need to be a deal on that issue one way or another eventually. And so if reaching that deal now, or at least making a step towards that deal now, is a pathway out of the shutdown, I don't know why we wouldn't at least explore that.
I want to go back to the question about the White House moving funds around to try and make sure military service members and others get paid. I don't think anybody disagrees with the concept that military people should be paid. But are you a little worried that Congress is surrendering the power of the purse and that the executive branch is making these decisions without your input?
Well, certainly that's why we need to get the government back open and to pass actual funding bills so that we do provide that appropriation. But remember, the White House didn't ask for this. You know, it's the job of Congress to actually fund the executive branch. So when they're suddenly told, oh, sorry, you don't have your funding anymore, they do need to figure out a way to make do. And so I do think that it was the right decision, at least in the short term, given that Congress was refusing to even pass a standalone bill to pay our military to find the funds.
But are you worried you may never get that power back if that power is ceded during this period of time and the White House uses this as a reason to start moving funds around, that could set a precedent that could be dangerous down the road?
Well, I think a lot of us have longstanding concerns about protecting Article 1, the legislative branch, the authority of the legislative branch. And that's not something that is started with this administration or the previous administration. And I think that there has been a long-standing and growing problem of more and more legislative authority being ceded. And so, of course, that's something that I'm concerned about. And I do think that, as sort of a larger issue, we do need to have Congress reclaim more of its constitutional authority.
Yeah. So let's talk about the specifics around, if we're to isolate one issue as a possible pathway out of the shutdown, and that's the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Do you have a particular position on this? Do you think that they should be extended? Would you be in favor of a one-year extension to at least allow for reforms to the program? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I'm open to any and all of those possibilities. I think that probably a one-year extension is the very least that we need to do. But we also need to recognize the larger issue here, which is the reason that healthcare costs keep continuing to grow, and address that underlying issue in it as well. So there are a lot of ideas for the sort of reforms that would lead us in that direction. I do think that needs to be part of a deal, but that's obviously going to take time for any such reforms to be effective, and American citizens should not have to pay the price in the meantime.
I talked to your colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene about this issue. She's obviously been very vocal about it. She agrees with you that the House should be back in session, but she also accused your party's leadership of not having a plan at all when it comes to health care. Do you think that's true? Does your party not have a plan when it comes to health care?
Well, I know that there have been a lot of ideas out there, health savings accounts, other reforms making things more transparent. I don't know that there's some great overarching plan that every single member of the House agrees on, because in the Republican conference, because health care is a notoriously complicated issue. I think there probably is something to the idea that both sides of the aisle have allowed this crisis to continue to grow and grow and grow, such that health care costs have just become astronomical. And this idea that suddenly people are going to see even further increases in their premiums when these subsidies run out, I think that's really unacceptable to all.
All right, let's talk about an issue that's really directly impacting you, and that's redistricting. You proposed a bill to ban mid-decade redistricting, as they're doing in Texas now. Now, California, your state, is proposing something along these lines. Are you getting any support from your colleagues in this vein? Do you think there's any chance that this bill has a reality of becoming law?
I think if it received a vote, it would pass. I have people who come up to me every day, and primarily on the Republican side, saying they think this is absolutely the right thing to do. They said to keep advocating for what you're advocating for. And this is particularly true of those who are in states that are being affected by this. Even in states where Republicans are in charge and Republicans stand to pick up seats, the members there don't like it because their districts are being butchered and they're losing communities that they've represented for some time, communities that have chosen them as their representatives. So this is not something that members on either side of the aisle are particularly in favor of, with this redistricting war that's breaking out across the country. And so I have advocated very strongly to the Speaker to bring this bill to the floor for a vote. And I think if it did get a vote, it would pass.
So, but are you upset with President Trump that he kind of put some pressure on Texas to begin kind of the first fire the first shot in this redistricting war? Do you wish that he hadn't done that?
Well, I absolutely disagree with what's going on with Texas. I disagree what's happening in any state that's looking at doing a mid-decade gerrymander. Whether that was the first shot or was responding to some other shot, obviously you could have the two sides argue back and forth on that. My view is gerrymandering is wrong wherever it occurs. I'm urging our voters in California to vote no on Proposition 50 because that's our chance to reject gerrymandering in the one place that we can in our own state. But ultimately, I'm disappointed in the Speaker for not standing up both for our own members as well as for the institution of the House of Representatives. I think this is doing a terrible thing for our country, for democracy, for representative government, having this redistricting war cascading from one state to the next.
Okay, it's probably not over yet, though. Congressman Kiley, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
And we're going to go now to some breaking news out of Chicago. That's where we're getting reports of protesters clashing with federal immigration law enforcement officials. This video from our NBC station in Chicago showing what appears to be armed agents, many of whom are wearing gas masks, confronting a large crowd in Chicago's East Side neighborhood. Now, it's not clear why those federal agents were in that area or what led to that incident. NBC's Shaq Brewster joins us now from our Chicago bureau with more on this. So, Shaq, what do we know about this clash between the protesters and armed agents?
Hi there, Ryan. Well, we're getting a better picture of what was happening and what happened before this all took place. You see that video, some very tense moments there in that East Side neighborhood. According to Custom and Border Patrol via a DHS spokesperson, they were out doing some immigration patrols. We know they have that surge going on right now called Operation Midway Blitz. And this is according to their statement. They say an undocumented immigrant, quote, rammed a Border Patrol vehicle and attempted to flee the scene. That then led to a vehicle pursuit, and they used a pit maneuver to stop that vehicle. They say that's when the two people who were inside the vehicle began to flee, and those two who they say were undocumented were arrested. At that moment, a crowd, they say, began to form, and they confirmed that they used, quote, crowd control measures to help get agents out of there. Now, we're also hearing from Chicago Police Department. Remember, Chicago Police, they do not assist with any of these immigration operations, but they were called in response to that vehicle crash. And they say that they were called because of an accident, and they attempted to de-escalate the situation between the crowd and the federal agents. You see some of that on your screen right now, and you see some of the police officers there standing in between the federal agents and the crowd. This is a quote from Chicago Police Department. They say individuals then began throwing objects at the federal agents, at which point the federal agents deployed tear gas into the street. 13 CPD, so Chicago Police Department members, were exposed to the tear gas. If I can add a little bit of context to this, Ryan, we know that there's these escalated immigration enforcement operations, not just in Chicago, but really the surrounding suburbs as well. That has led to a lot of tension in the community. DHS just this morning celebrated some 1,500 arrests of criminals, their words, that they've made in this Operation Midway Blitz. So there's definitely been a lot of tension in the community. The idea that crowds come out with their cell phones as they document what they perceive as wrongdoing by federal agents, that is something that you see increasingly and is happening a lot. But right now we have from Custom Border Patrol, they're saying that their agents, they were conducting an arrest, suspect fled, a crowd began to form, and we do know from Chicago Police that they did have 13 officers who were impacted by what they're calling tear gas. You see some of it on your screen right now. Tear gas that was deployed to help stop the crowd, or at least keep the crowd away from the federal agents there, Ryan.
Okay, Shaq, thanks so much for being on top of that. Stand by. If you get more information, please let us know, and we'll put you back on with the latest updates. Shaq Brewster for us live in Chicago. Thanks, Shaq. Up next, the main event. Governor Janet Mills jumps into a crowded Democratic primary to unseat Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine, as Mills, who would be 79 years old at her swearing in, reignites a debate inside her party over generational change. Keep it here on Meet the President. Welcome back. Democrats need all the help they can get if they want to take back the Senate in next year's midterms, which means they're going to need to pretty much win every competitive race on the map. And that includes Maine, where Democratic Governor Janet Mills just officially launched her bid to take on Republican Senator Susan Collins. But Mills is going to have to win the Democratic primary first. The 77-year-old governor telling NBC News, quote, "I would not plan to serve for more than one term. But this time is vital, and this moment in our history is urgent and very troublesome. I believe I'm the most qualified person for the seat, for the campaign, because I've run 2 statewide elections, and I have the energy and the wherewithal to do it." Her entry into the race prompting our friends at the Cook Political Report to change the Maine Senate rating from lean Republican to a toss-up. Susan Collins has seen plenty of toss-ups before and dispatched them aside. For more, I'm joined by Sahil Kapoor, the senior national political reporter for NBC News, former Congressman Joe Crowley, a Democrat from New York who served as the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and Sarah Chamberlain, the president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. So let's dig into this, Sahil. There's so much to talk about in Maine. Janet Mills is 77 years old right now, at a time where Democrats are talking about generational change. Just for the stats on this, she's 79 when she takes office. She would be 84 at the end of her first term, which she claims is going to be her only term. We've seen many of senators tell us they're only going to have one term, and then they run and run and run. Does this conflict at all with Democrats selling this message to voters writ large about generational change?
A little bit, yes. I'm fascinated by this primary in Maine for so many reasons, mainly because it's a flashpoint for a bunch of the battles that are taking place within the Democratic Party. Not just the generational point. Of course, he's 41 and she's 77 now, but there's also the insider-outsider spectrum. This is a moment where Democratic insiders are not very popular. Can Graham Plattner take advantage of that? There's a whole question of what kind of candidates Democrats want in the future. Do they want more, safe, polishment, establishment-oriented candidates, or do they want someone like Graham Plattner, who is raw? He comes across as authentic. He's more of a populist. So I think all of that, factors in here. And the question of, Maine, the general election, it's extremely important for Democrats because they need 4 seats to win back the Senate majority. That's going to be very difficult even in the best of circumstances. And if they can't win Maine, the whole question becomes kind of preposterous.
Yeah. Congressman Crowley, I don't mean to bring up sad moments from your past history, but you might have been the canary in the coal mine when it came to the question of generational change in your race against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Have Democrats learned the lessons from that race that you ran a couple of years ago versus where they are now? And how should they take this entry of Janet Mills into this race?
Well, a couple of observations and thoughts. 7 years ago, at 56 years of age, I was called Grandpa Crowley.
At 56.
I'm 63 now, maybe on the edge of being grandpa-ish. I didn't think so back at 56 with 20 years experience in House leadership, but that was the decision was made, and we move on. I don't think that being 84 is a disqualification for Democrats. Last time I checked, there are plenty of 84-year-old people still in office in our party,
too, right? Yeah.
and in both parties. But I do think, it's a good observation in terms of, is this really transformative? I do think that she became a bit of a juggernaut when she challenged the president at the White House. She got a lot of attention. I think Maine is a very different kind of a state. It's one of those New England kind of states where they have town halls and people are more independent. I think that's also how Collins has conducted herself. She's never really been towing the line. So I do think I think it's going to be a dichotomy between the experience, the pushback against Trump, and this transformational age issue I think Democrats will have to deal with within the primary.
And Sarah, I have to mention Susan Collins kind of is the poster child for your movement in the Main Street Partnership, and she has turned back challenge after challenge in Maine. What do you think her campaign is thinking right now? Would they rather run against maybe an untested insurgent or an established candidate who's won statewide like Janet Mills?
Well, first of all, it's going to be a bloody primary. So if I was running Senator Collins' campaign, I would be smiling because it would be nasty. We know that. If I were her, I'd rather run against a 77-year-old woman. Since the senator is also in her 70s, it kind of takes the age right off the table. So I think we're going to be in a very good position in Maine. We always are. The Democrats always think that they can defeat her, and she is still there.
Okay. So let's talk about how the establishment's handling this, Sahil, because Mills says that she was encouraged by the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Schumer's been very active in his recruitment efforts. He went out and got Roy Cooper to run in North Carolina. He's gotten others to run as well. Should the establishment in Washington be putting any kind of a thumb on the scale in a race like this?
Well, they're not explicitly, and I think they're very cautious. They're very aware that there's a certain skepticism toward the Democratic Party leadership in Washington. So I don't see, Schumer coming out and blaring, an endorsement of Janet Mills, although it does seem like that is where his mind is, that given where the DSCC is. And the fact that I don't think Schumer in particular has a huge impact on the voters of Maine. I don't think they spend a lot of time thinking about him positively or negatively, but he has a lot of resources at his disposal, tens of millions through the DSCC and through the super PAC that is aligned with him. And if they do steer that money, that's going to create a real obstacle for Graham Plattner. And he is aware of this. He is already campaigning in explicit opposition to Schumer. The question is, can he gin up enough of a backlash to the existing Democratic Party establishment to overcome that?
And can he build a big of a national platform, Congressman? That was one of the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did in your race, was that she was able to get a lot of support across the country, and a lot of small dollar donors came into her. Does Plattner have the ability to do that?
I think it's
as well?
important to look back 7 years ago in terms of I outspent her 10 to 1, maybe more, so it wasn't necessarily about the money. It was about change. Trump had won in 2016. The only change you can make in a democratically controlled district like mine was in the primary.
Right.
So people, if this is a change election, I think you'll see change. I think it's tough for Democrats in the Senate in 2026, just in terms of it's going to be a tough haul to begin with. I think looking at some of these seats, whether it's in North Carolina or in Maine, where there may be an opportunity, depending on which candidate makes it to the fore, to have an opportunity to actually win the seats. And so that's why I think you're seeing Schumer involved in some of these districts.
Yeah. And Sarah, when you think about this idea of a change candidate, Susan Collins is the exact opposite, right? Is Maine a different state, as the congressman alludes to? Are they necessarily pining for change in the way that some other states across the country might be?
They don't seem to be, and the polling doesn't show that they are looking for change. I think that when the primary comes out, the governor will win the primary, so it'll be the senator versus the governor. But, if people who live in Maine, they're a little bit older. They're wonderful, but they're a tad bit older, and they're not really into change like New York was, and New York continues to be. So I'm very confident that Senator Collins will come through cleanly.
And maybe even expand on that a little more. We count Susan Collins out, it seems, at almost every opportunity she comes up on the ballot. I mean, we had written her obituary, her political obituary 6 years ago. Why is it that she's able to overcome the doubters each and every time?
First, she's very independent. She is an R behind her name, but she does not follow lockstep with leadership or with the president. And she is Maine. I mean, if you know her, if you see her up there, she's very much Maine. Like, she's in her flannel shirts and she's wandering around. She's really one of the people, and they like that in Maine. And she gets all over the state, and people know her. They've known her for years. They know her husband. So she'll continue to be elected until I think she wants to retire.
Also the sole surviving unicorn in the Senate, the only senator who represents a state that's consistently won by the other party in presidential elections. It would be a real moment if she also loses this time.
Okay, we're going to have to go now because we are going to take you live to the White House Rose Garden, where President Trump is holding a ceremony to posthumously award Charlie Kirk with the Medal of Freedom. Kirk was an outspoken conservative activist and a key organizer for the MAGA movement before he was assassinated last month while speaking on a college campus. Let's listen in to President Trump.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.